Do you need a website for your cannabis company? How about a logo or packaging design? Branding is more than just your logo. It's every experience your customers have with your business. Located in the heart of Humboldt County is a little creative and design house called the Yak Group. From creating a strategy to overhauling an existing brand, visit them online at www.theyakgroup.com, like the big furry animal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show. This is Larry Mishkin talking to you from Chicago. We've got a great show with us today. We've got a fantastic guest that I'm going to let our co-host Rob tell you about in a second. We're going to be talking about the Grateful Dead, Dead and Company's Playing in the Sand, which is going to be coming up next winter. But Jim Marty, our crack reporter on that kind of thing, already has news on it. And seeing as how 49 years ago, the Grateful Dead launched their Europe 72 tour, we thought that would be something great to talk about today. So we're all very excited. There's a lot of good things on the show today. First, let me say hey to Jim Marty out in Colorado. Jim, how are you doing?
Very good. Things are good in Colorado. And yeah, we're very excited about Playing in the Sand next January. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I think I got my pre-sale tickets this morning. At least I got a notification that I'm in the queue. So very excited about that. And Rob has brought us a great guest today, so I'm going to turn it over to him right now and let him talk about our guest.
Great. Hey, Rob, I'm coming to you guys from sunny Southern California. I've got a buddy of mine, Jerry Griffin, who's going to be on the show with us, another San Diegan who's joining us. Jerry and I got to know each other a few years back. My former business partner and good buddy from law school, Brian Gillespie, had introduced us years ago. And as he and I were speaking, he said, "Hey, I see you got this Deadhead Cannabis Show podcast. You should have me on as a guest sometime." And I say, "No, you're a Deadhead." And he said, "Yeah, of course I'm a Deadhead." And I said, "I should have put together, Denison College guy, and in the cannabis industry." So Jerry's been working in and out of the space now for I think about 4 or 5 years. And I think before he came to it, he and I spoke about some different plans that he had when he was trying to think about a way to enter cannabis. So it's great to have him on the show and great to watch the progression of what he's done in the space over the last couple of years. So Jerry, great to have you, man. Welcome to the Deadhead Cannabis Show.
Rob, thanks so much. And Jim, Larry, thanks so much for having me. I do appreciate it.
So Jerry, why don't you tell us about everything you've been doing in the space and what you're working on now? I know you're with a great company called Creo that's doing some biosynthetic cannabinoid work, as well as some of the things you've been doing in the space over the last couple of years. And then maybe segue into your experience as a Deadhead. But we'd love to know more about what you're doing in cannabis right now.
Yeah, so I guess starting back in 2000, I moved to San Diego promptly after graduating college, and not the least of the reasons being their lax attitude towards weed. I spent a number of years learning about business in general at Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 type companies. And then I jumped into regulated cannabis right around 2018, which was a few months before California went rec legal. I've done quite a few things in the space, but in short, I've pretty much seen it all. I've been up the hill in Soham and Mendo and Trinity. I've been to grows and labs all over the country. I've seen the packaging and hardware supply chain side of things, and I've even dabbled a little bit in retail. But presently, I have managed to marry two passions of mine, one of which is the environment and another of which is cannabis science. I am a passive founder in a sustainable packaging business that services the cannabis space. We are called Go Zero, and our goal is to fully remove high-velocity, one-time use plastic from the industry. We just landed our first shipment of 1 million child-resistant joint tubes that can be turned into compost about 90 days after they're disposed of, and we have a certification called ASTM D6400 that supports that claim. So if you want to check that out, we are at go0packaging.com. My full-time job, when I'm not, directing traffic over at Go0, I lead business development for Creo Ingredients. And Creo is a producer of rare cannabinoids through what we call a precision fermentation process. We haven't proven this yet, but we believe the process uses far less water, land, and energy than traditional cultivation and extraction, especially when it comes to the rarer and more powerful cannabinoids. So that is not at all to say that plant cultivation is necessarily bad for the environment, but when it comes to certain cannabinoids and the mass market potential for some of those cannabinoids, it can become very, very taxing on the environment to produce them from plants. So Creo will be going to market with CBGA and CBG shortly, and we'll build our portfolio out according to how the market develops for some of these other rare cannabinoids. And if you want to check out Creo, you can check it out at creoingredients.com. That's CREO ingredients with an S.com. So that kind of brings you guys to present. But before I jump in, I have to say I've listened to you guys a lot, and your guests have been incredible, and the conversations have been amazing. And I don't nearly have the number of shows or depth of knowledge that some of you have and some of your guests. I only saw the Dead a few times before Jerry passed in '95. But I started it out with a bang at Nassau when I was 15, and I think that show was April 2nd, '93. So I just passed the anniversary there. But to give you a sense of how maniacal I am about the Dead, my two daughters don't go to bed at night until I play them Terrapin from Swing Auditorium in '77. They call it inspiration, and if I try to sub it in for another Terrapin from another show, they immediately make me put it back to Swing '77. They know Wharf Rat by heart. They call it Blind and Dirty. And this isn't because I forced it upon them, but it's just because that's all they hear nonstop in the house, in the car. Yeah, so anyway, that's me. That brings you to kind of present. That's my connection to the Dead. And I appreciate you all for having me.
And do your daughters like fish too?
They do, but my wife hates fish. So it doesn't quite get the play around the house that the Dead gets.
I understand completely.
They call fish dance party though. They say, "Hey, Daddy, can you put on dance party?" Because then we put on the old videos, and the whole house gets into a full dance party.
Sure.
It's funny you bring up the Swing Auditorium as a Terrapin, because that's the first Terrapin ever played. I think that's 22677, if I remember correctly.
That's exactly right. First Sesame.
Yeah, First Sesame as well. So sometimes the first is the best, I guess, for you. But which Wharf Rat do they hold you to?
It's a good question. I feel like it's such a static kind of song, and that they don't necessarily have much of a preference. And maybe I'm off base on that, but for me, they like the tune. I used to sing them to bed with it every night, and that's how they know it by heart. But every time it comes on, they pick it out immediately and start singing the lyrics. Excuse me.
Well, Terrapin is a great tune like that. 226 happens to be my wife's birthday, so I'm well familiar with that show as well. It is a great Terrapin, and my kids love Terrapin. When they'd play it, they'd dance around and call it turtle music. So they were very happy with that too. But, over time they got to know all of it. Now they're old enough; they're true fish heads, and they run off to all the fish shows on their own, which is great. They have a great time doing it, and it's just nice because it kind of makes it generational. So from my perspective, if your kids are already into it at a younger age, you've got a long way to go. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm grooming them for sure.
It is. Every age is a fun age. I've enjoyed every year with our boys. So a little bit of business, and not asking to give away any trade secrets, but what is the base material of these joint tubes that you can compost?
Yeah, it's right in our marketing material: polylactic acid, PBA, and some mineral fillers. And it's not so much the materials that are proprietary; it's the engineering that goes into combining the form factor with the materials. Because they're not, plastic gets a lot of use because it's really malleable and very easy to work with, right? But of course, it's horrible for the environment. So the real tech is in the engineering and the actual process of making the form factors.
And what about things for grams and shatter and things like that, packaging for those type of cannabis products?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of our strategy, we really just want to make a statement with the joint tubes, and we aim to wholesale replace the supply chain as it exists today for with plastic tubes. I know it's a lofty goal, but we've done the math on how much single-use plastic goes into the environment as a result of those joint tubes, and it's mind-bending to think about. And we feel very much like if we can replace that, right? And it starts with getting to an adoptability rate. So it starts with getting some velocity and getting some volume, and then getting down to a price point that you really doesn't make any sense to buy plastic tubes anymore. If we can get to that point, then we feel like we can wholesale replace it. And we will effectively have removed something like 880 tons a year of plastic from the environment. And then we'll go from there. And we're not, confining ourselves to the cannabis space. But there's a problem, and we want to help address it. And we all come from cannabis, and we all love the sector, and we love the people in it, and we want to help there first. But certainly we expect to expand outward into other sectors. Think cosmetics and beauty. Anywhere where there's these single-use, really like high-velocity plastic products that just get thrown away and are too small to be recycled.
And do you have a market for the compost material on the back end?
Yeah, I suppose, right? It would depend on the compost facilities kind of market, right? And that's kind of part and parcel of our process. We need to line up which facilities we like the best, because the best way to do this, instead of having folks try to compost it themselves or even go put it in the garden, is to have it fully returned to like a municipal facility, who then puts it right back into growing plants or into soil to grow new plants. So that's part of the process that we're working through and kind of identifying who those partners in. But effectively, it becomes whoever their market is and whoever they sell to and whoever they sell that compost to. Ideally, it's customers that are cannabis customers, right?
And have there been any studies done on that type of compost to show its effectiveness when it's derived from these types of plastics?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the ASTM D6400 certification, part and parcel of that certification is to ensure that the compost that comes out the other end is non-toxic and will support the growth of plants or encourage the growth of plants. So they actually put the compost, part of the process is growing plants in the compost and testing those plants, and also testing the soil for any toxicity.
On the Creo side, because I find that fascinating as well. I know right before we hopped on, Jim had asked you whether it was THC or non-THC, and if you're looking for cannabinoids, I guess it could be either. I noticed when you talk about CBGA and CBG, I assume in those instances we're talking about final products that don't have THC in them, or perhaps not a whole lot. How does this, while you're doing this, are you actually going through the plant itself and discovering these rare cannabinoids within the cannabis plant and isolating them in a way that nobody else has been able to do?
No. So if you think about traditional fermentation, and you think about, most people think of beer or wine or spirits, and, you feed a yeast sugar, and it turns it into alcohol. Very similar concept here. So we're taking a organism and we're feeding it a sugar, and it's secreting out a cannabinoid. So these are organisms that are trained to do this. And so from the standpoint of, that's why we call it fermentation, from the standpoint of like CBGA and CBG and why we've chosen those cannabinoids, all cannabinoids kind of trickle down from those two cannabinoids, really from CBGA. CBGA decarboxylates into CBG, and then ultimately all the other cannabinoids downstream come out downstream from that as the plant matures. And so we felt that would be a great place to start, in that we can start looking at different conversions enzymatically or through other means, or create pathways to creating those cannabinoids directly, if that makes sense.
Are they strain independent, meaning they're not necessarily based on any one particular type of flower? You just kind of create it as you go along?
Yeah, no, it's so certainly there is plant gene material that are inserted into the organisms, and that drives the metabolism of the sugars into the ultimate the cannabinoid. So there's plant material certainly involved.
What kind of reaction or notice does the user get from these specially derived cannabinoids?
So, it's a great question. I am in the process right now of turning our cannabinoids into different form factors to try out. So we are doing a microemulsion to turn it into basically a ready-to-drink beverage. We are turning it into a vape, and effectively some select few people like myself will get to try them out and see what they do. But in the absence of spending tons and tons of money to do efficacy studies or clinical trials, right? And the science could be just an endless pit of testing after testing after testing. We felt like these are the right places to start. Anecdotally, I've been told that the vaping side of it, or even if you were to do a dab of some of these compounds, it's been described as a few beers and sitting in a hot tub. So just a very relaxing kind of effect. I've been told on the drink side, much of the same, but I'll let you know. But that's the anecdotal kind of evidence. And then I can tell you also from my own personal experience with similar cannabinoids that are from the plant, CBG definitely gives a sense of focus, definitely gives a sense of mood enhancing. I've described it to people where you have a really rough day and you come home and the kids are all over you and you have your tolerance for everything is about zero, and you can take one hit off this thing and you don't really feel high, but everything kind of melts away. All your anxiety kind of goes away and you just feel 100 times better and you can get through. But that's just, my own personal experience. Everybody's different.
Yeah, I've gotten samples of CBG with the vape pen, and I do think there is a slight high to it. It's very slight, but there is maybe it is how you described it, a falling away of stress, but I do notice a slight lift.
We here at the Deadhead Cannabis Show love samples, and we will give great reviews on air after we've had an opportunity to subject it to our very rigorous standards here.
Absolutely. And so, we've got the cannabinoids that we make through our own process. We've got cannabinoids that we supply through who we believe are the best and brightest across the country. And we've worked on some functional formulations that kind of combine different cannabinoids to promote a certain outcome. And so I will get you all samples of those as well. It's pretty exciting stuff. It's stuff we're doing with things like THCV, CBC, CBG, cbga, cbga, and a few others. So I'll be sure to get you all samples of all of that to give a try to.
It's great. What about Delta 8 and Delta 9? How do they tie in?
Delta 8 and Delta 9 we steer clear of. It's from a regulatory perspective, our target customer is, I guess, long-term big consumer packaged goods, those that have like a serious aversion to the THC side of things. And so, Delta 9, Delta 8, we just steer clear to those. They are heavily regulated. Delta 8 is not regulated presently, but I think kind of that's just a matter of time. So we tend to steer clear of those. I'm, very well versed on all of those, but tend to kind of, as a company, we tend to steer clear of those. THCV, folks kind of pause at that one. It's got a very unfortunate name, but very different than those two molecules, the D8 and the D9.
So Jerry, as you know, I spent a fair amount of time in the biopharmaceutical side of the industry as well, and knowing the competition out there and some of the other companies you guys are sort of racing to get first past the post on the IP that's related to a lot of this stuff. The trace cannabinoids seem to be the most exciting because they're the cannabinoids that don't express themselves in large enough quantities in the plant for extraction purposes. As you guys are thinking about where to focus, what do you think the next cannabinoid is that's going to be really exciting? And then are you also looking at new formulations or adding a carbon chain to a molecule to make sure that it's something that's never been invented before, the plant doesn't produce in nature? Are you thinking about developing new cannabinoids that are still going to bind to the CB1 or CB2 receptor?
Yeah, so I think that from my perspective, CBD and and THC are kind of tip of the iceberg, right? I think that the next man up, so to speak, is CBN or CBG, right? You can interchange those depending upon who you're asking. I'd probably argue the CBN market's a little bigger because there's a lot of finished product out there already, kind of latching on to the potential for sedation and sleep. So those would be the four that have the largest market potential presently. THCV, I think, has the largest mass market potential. There's a lot of indications that say that it's got a appetite suppressing type of functionality or a outcome, a weight loss type of outcome, a hyper focus, meaning like a energy uplifting type of outcome. And I think there's a lot of mass market potential for that and a lot of different form factors.
I was going to say, I think THCV is the molecule people are watching very closely because of the weight loss and the appetite suppression. That if you think about from a mass market appeal, the only thing about THCV, if you're not making it in the lab, it's obviously only expresses itself in sub-Saharan strains of cannabis. So it's your Durban poisons and your other landrace strains coming from sub-Saharan Africa, which makes it really, really limited as far as where you can actually extract it. So for you guys, I would think that going after something that's already rare enough in nature, but you can be producing in kilogram quantities in the lab, would be relatively exciting if you think this can be the new weight loss supplement that you can put across at every GNC and vitamin shop.
100%. And it just, I think, needs to come down in price to get to like a market rate that I guess is more adoptable. And also from a dosing perspective, it's very touchy. We hear anecdotally, and we've seen research to say that you can overdo it really quick, and you can get really uncomfortable really quick. So it's not like CBG or CBD or even THC. Little too much, is not going to be necessarily harmful, and you'll feel just fine after a little while. THCV can get really, really intense in a not positive way. So we have to be very careful, but the mass market potential is definitely there. You're exactly right. And to answer your other question about creating, I guess, what we would describe as novel cannabinoids. These are cannabinoids that have, like you said, an additional tail on them, so to speak, right? That make them more unique, but very similar in structure to existing cannabinoids. Certainly something we're looking at. That's pretty much as far as I can take that part of the conversation.
Right. Is the idea with that, though, I mean, some of the stuff you're creating doesn't otherwise exist, does it? I mean, how does it get placed on or analyzed, whether or not it should be on the Controlled Substances Act, for instance? I mean, what are the factors that they're looking at, and how do you create something that, if it's not coming directly from a plant itself, and you're creating it through fermentation? Yeah, I'm just wondering, what ultimately, what the government would think of it. Hopefully not very much, so you can go and do whatever you want to do with it, but there's no guarantees about that.
Yeah, and I think that's the argument, right? I think from the standpoint of, THC exists, but THC with a tail maybe doesn't exist, right? And now you've created basically the same cannabinoid with all the wellness value that it has and all the health value that it has, but now you've got it patented, right? And you've got IP, and nobody else can use that product without, your consent or your licensing or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, from a regulatory perspective, right, you tend to kind of transcend the regulatory environment a little bit. Nobody's to say that they won't step in and say, that you can't do that or whatever the case may be. But yeah, those would all be kind of the arguments in favor of doing something like that. And Rob, I'm sure you have some more to add on that, but that's kind of my view.
Yeah, I mean, whatever I add is sort of the same where you are, which is that at a certain point it starts getting very, very technical, and it also starts getting into the internal dynamics of the businesses that are actually doing this work. And each of them are going at this from a slightly different perspective because they've all got bottlenecks against other people's IP, as you well know. So at a certain point, you have to be very careful about protecting methodology and where your process patents are in the process. But I'm a firm believer that either bioindustrial cannabinoids or biosynthetic or bioidentical cannabinoids are going to be the future for anything that's not flower or combustible. Anything for a vape pen, anything for edibles. Pretty much any product you can think of that doesn't require flower as being the base element, I think ultimately would be driven by what's coming out of the lab. And, the whole necessity of having these massive cultivation facilities to service the industry, I think is largely muted in probably no less than 5 years. And it's something that's probably more disruptive than anything else the market has ever seen. So, like it or not, it's coming.
Well, Jerry, let me ask you this question really fast, because I understand that, as you develop these things, IP becomes very, very important, and something that, that's what you have. You have to protect it. If you have a whole bunch of different companies, working in this field, trying to make their way through, and each one of them, you get a patent on this, they get a patent on that, does it ultimately work against the overall development because so many people hold so many different little pieces? Is there an idea that maybe at some point people all kind of come together and say, we're all going to license everything to see what we can do with all of these ideas?
Yeah, and you've clearly, you're the legal mind on the call, and I won't even pretend to know anywhere near as much about it as you do, but I'll put it this way. The IP landscape is a very, very critical piece of our positioning in the market. And, we took a very, very in-depth look of everything out there before we even did any science whatsoever. Right. And so there's certainly a thicket of IP out there that people are treading upon, but there's no money quite yet. And it hasn't become too important to anybody, but it will. And, we believe that we're positioned to kind of sidestep all of that with, just that we've done our due diligence on the front end before we even did any science. And I think I answered your question, but yeah, but I think your point was that there's going to be a lot of IP that's going to be kind of intersecting one another in the future. And we're very cognizant of that and very much operating in a way that we're going to steer clear of all of that and to the best of our ability.
So, Jerry, I know you got a hard stop at a certain point, so if there's a time you need to duck off, we'll thank you in advance for joining us, but stay on this conversation as long as you'd like as we start transitioning over to talk about, the Grateful Dead and what's happening in Grateful Dead world. But, as long as you can stay, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, I'm so bummed I got to go. I appreciate you guys. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes.
Well, before you go, let's make sure we get your contact information, your website.
Yeah, where do people go to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jerry Griffin. I can be reached at jerry.griffin at creoingredients.com. That's creoingredients.com with an S. And I also can be reached, our websites rather, are www.creoingredients.com and also www.go0packaging.com.
Hey y'all, I want to talk about what you put your weed in. Cannabis packaging can make or break your brand in a competitive retail environment. That's why you need a partner like Gold Leaf Print and Packaging. The team at Gold Leaf Print and Packaging are experts at digital printing and use the latest in technology to print foil and varnish directly to your packaging. Head to www.goldleafpackaging.com/grow and mention Hotboxing in Humboldt to receive 10% off your first order.
Transitioning over, as Larry alluded to earlier, today officially is the 49th anniversary of the first show of Europe 72. So for all those out there that know the run, it was 22 nights that were set across almost about a month and a half in Europe. Lots of England shows, lots of shows that really are still celebrated today. I think 100 Years Hall is still considered one of the all-time great shows. Some of the Lyceum shows were fantastic. Copenhagen. There was just so much that was happening at that time. That was, kind of the last days of Pig. It was also, when Billy was still the only drummer at the time. But it was just a terrific time, and it was really memorialized by the fact that there was, a triple album put out soon afterwards, which actually became one of the most successful albums for the Grateful Dead, with 6 sides and almost no repeated tracks across 100 plus songs. So it's amazing to think that the longevity and how much people are still talking about this run today. And I don't think the Grateful Dead ever went back to Europe for a run anything close to that. They did the fall of 1990 run, which I think was 12 or 14 dates, but nothing like a 22-night run after 72. So we thought it'd be fun to address that one. And now, Jim and Larry, if you guys have any thoughts about what that run looked like and what it means today,
Sure.
I'd love to hear it.
Well, I have to say that Europe 72 is probably one of my favorite Dead tours. I am one of the guys that went out and spent the big money and bought the box set, and I have the entire tour. And when my wife lets me, I typically this time of year will play each show on the night that it actually ran. Some of them tend to sound alike, so after a few nights, people are maybe looking for a little more variety. But overall, to me, the significance of it is that number one, the Dead proved they were more than just a local American fad. They had solid fans around the world, and especially in Europe, which was already exposed to some of the greatest rock and roll acts of all time, and yet they sold out everywhere they went for the most part. They had big crowds. It was a very successful tour for them, but I think it gave them a chance not just to tour together and really coalesce as a group, especially with Mickey out and just the five of them. But one of the great things about this tour, and that you can do if you have the box set, is you can start listening to some of these songs that they played on the very first night, and then you can listen to them as they play them over the course of the tour, playing in the band. Greatest Story Ever Told, a lot of Bobby songs really getting worked out on this tour, so that by the end, the last few nights, you're hearing them and they sound completely different than they did at the opening of the tour. In fact, sound a lot more like the versions we were used to, that we came into in later years. I think they're all tremendous shows. I think you're right, Rob. The 100-Year Hall, they had released that separately, not the full show, but they had released a lot of it separately. They were released periodically, a few other bits and pieces of it. My favorite on the whole thing is, they did actually release, I think, a 3 or 4 disc set just of pullouts from the London shows. I seem to recall that they released that. Of the tour, though, interestingly enough, my favorite show is the one that they played in May at the Lille Fairgrounds in Lille, France. And my wife has a French cousin who knew somebody who was at the show, and all they ever talked about was this show. And the set list, as compared to all the other nights, is fairly standard, but it's an excellent show. It's great energy. And one of the best things about the box set is you get the little story, not just the big book, but each show in the disc has its own little outline. Somebody came in and wrote 4 or 5 pages of that show and what the circumstances were and what was going on. And the Lille France show was a great show. There was problems with their equipment and some other stuff, and they pulled it all together and played this amazing show, which I think was kind of typical for the tour.
That was the Olympia Theater show.
I had a couple of stories I've read or heard over the years that in the Paris show, at set break, the audience started to get up and leave. They thought it was over. They didn't realize it was 2 sets, and somebody had to go out on the stage and shout from the stage in French to sit the heck down. There's a second set. And then another story I heard that financially, although they had good crowds, the expense of the tour was tremendous, and they really didn't make a lot of money on the tour itself, and it was the album that really bailed out that tour. So that's a couple little insights that I've heard over the years.
The other fun little tidbit of information is that Elvis Costello, a noted Grateful Dead fan, talks about how he saw the Dead for the first time in '72 at the Bickershaw Festival, which was a show in England that they just kind of threw in the middle of everything. They were in the continent. They came over just to play this show as part of this festival. But the story behind it is it was a rainy day and the fields were all muddy. And yet, a young Elvis Costello, found his way out there and braved the elements and was really turned on to the Dead and to their style of music. And, who knows what impact that may have had on his future music that those of us who follow him have come to know and love.
Yes, there's actually a picture of him. He's like in the 3rd or 4th row. It's an outdoor show. Like you said, it's a rainy day. And Elvis Costello circled and said, over the side he writes, "That's me." I forget where I saw that picture.
Sure.
So a couple of things from that tour. I mean, one, the box that you refer to, Larry, I don't think people, that unless they order it, there's only 7,200 copies of it produced, and I think it's sold out in 4 days. And it came in, I think, in 73 discs in a steamer trunk. Is that right? Like just
70, 70 plus, and it's shaped like a small steamer truck. They've got all the discs in there. And then they've got a coffee table book and pictures, which is all good, and I love that stuff too. But yeah, it looks kind of cool. It's like one of those things you can set out, and people, walk up, and it's got travel stickers on the outside of it, and they printed a little special sticker with your name that they put on there as well.
So the other thing I was going to mention is, this is a cool one for me personally, is I was born on April 30th, 1972. Which technically is not a night they played, but because of the time change, I was born early in the morning in New York on April 30th, 72, which would technically make it, still 4/29/72, Europe. So I was trying to gauge the date or whether or not the time change worked in my favor, and unfortunately, I don't think it does, because it would have been a bit earlier East Coast time. But I just missed having a Grateful Dead show on my birthday, and I was hoping, had it been the other way, that I would have been on there. So technically, that first night of Paris, France, on May 3rd, would have been the first Grateful Dead show of my lifetime, and I missed having one on my birthday by one day from Munich.
Well, Rob, I just want to say that just ages you, because I can't speak for Jim Marty, but certainly when I was born, although Jerry and Rob Hunter may have already been met up and playing in Menlo Park and other places, along the Bay Area, even the Warlocks were still a few years off.
Yeah. And the other thing about that tour, too, is we forget, those guys were like in their mid-20s, like Kreutzmann celebrated his 26th birthday on that tour. Most of the whole band was probably between age like 24 and 27, running around Europe for 2 months. That must have been such a blast at that age in their lives, when they spent the majority of their time, cruising around the United States and mostly in the Bay Area, to, go over there and experience as a band 2 months in Europe, where they're still a few years behind we were with kind of the hippie days and what was happening as far as experimentation. That it must have been a complete shock to the very conservative sensibilities of some of those countries.
I just heard a fantastic episode on the Big Steve Hour recently, where he talked about Europe 72, and he talked about the tour and how great it was for all of them. And that's exactly what he said, that, here were guys, who grew up in the Bronx or wherever, and they had seen the United States traveling with the Grateful Dead, but now they were finally getting a chance to go out and see the world. And one of the things that Big Steve talked about was the significant role that psychedelics played throughout the tour, during the shows and even on the off days. And how much fun it was, and there's pictures of them. They went around and they used to wear these clown hats on their heads as well. The
bolos and the bozos.
Right, the bolos and the bozos, exactly. And you see that, and you're like, can you imagine? I can only imagine if when I was 26, all of my good buddies who I was going to see the Dead with, somebody turned us loose in Europe for a month and a half and said, "Here you go, have some fun." It's incredible. And yet they, most nights, at least almost every night of that tour, they showed up and they played great stuff. It's
it wasn't just the band. They brought along a huge entourage of the Grateful Dead family. Like everyone went on that tour. They brought like 50 plus people with them. Whereas 2 full buses all the time, like school buses, not touring buses, of people that were going from town to town. Where the entire extended Grateful Dead family was on that tour. Which, when you think about the absurdity of what that must have been like with the psychedelics and the partying that was happening, that's like Festival Express, a magnified of what it'd be like just cruising around like that, where it's not just you and the bandmates, but it's everyone, kids, wives, friends, everybody being on the thing, just going from town to town and taking in the sights and on the off nights. By all accounts, it was really, let's get to see Europe, let's get to see some of the great stuff that here's our chance.
Yeah, I think I listened to that same Big Steve hour where at the time, Owsley was in jail at the time of that tour.
Right.
And so somebody else in the crew whipped up a batch of LSD based on Stanley's recipe, but it ended up being 5 or 10 times stronger than anything they had. And that's what they brought to Europe. Right. And it was only when they got back to the United States did they realize how strong the LSD they brought to Europe was. But, there is film. I've seen it. I forget where I see some of this stuff. It's been a lot of years, but there's a film of when they land in London, they go to a party put on by Warner Brothers. And Sam Cutler was the tour manager on that tour, and he is going over how to convert dollars into pounds for the European leg of that. And Jerry picked up the math right away. And
sure.
Anyway, look for that film. It's some really cool backstage film of that. I've had all that stuff at one time. I don't know if I still do. But, loved Europe 72, listened to it many, many times, all night long. So.
Yep, and so one other good story that comes out of Europe 72 that I also picked up recently listening to our good friend Big Steve. On this show, on previous episodes, we've talked about Jerry's guitars. When we had Jay Blakesberg on, he told us some interesting stories about Wolf and how he facilitated John Mayer's opportunity to play it at Citi Field a few years ago. And it's just one of those things. We talked about the exhibit at the MoMA in New York when they had all the rock and roll guitars there and everything, and had a chance to go and see Wolf and all of them. But what Steve said about Wolf was that when the guitar was originally built by Doug, and I always forget his last name, I'm sorry. Irwin, thank you. There was nothing on the bottom. And in fact, when they went to Europe for Europe 72, they saw a sticker of the Wolf. And they purchased it, and the original Wolf on the bottom of the guitar was a sticker. And the reason they did that is because this Wolf is a wolf that was originally designed by a cartoonist named Tex Avery, who's famous for Bugs Bunny and things like that. And one of his regular repeating themes was a wolf who would stand by a lamppost on the corner of Hollywood and Vine and give a really exaggerated wolf whistle when pretty women walked by. So they had a copyright on it. So they couldn't sell the stickers or any images of it in the United States. But in Europe, the U.S. Copyright laws didn't apply. So they sold stickers with these types of things, and they saw it, they bought it, they slapped it on the sticker. But when they got back to the States and Doug Irwin saw it, he took the guitar back from Jerry, took the sticker off, and recreated it with inlay on the bottom of this guitar that's absolutely beautiful and amazing. But I always just assumed that Doug had manufactured the guitar that way originally. And it wasn't until Big Steve kind of clued me in. But it was, just funny to hear one more little story, that rolled off as a result of, Europe 72.
And the other place to get good information, if you ever read Rock Scully's book, Living with the Dead, which is one of the first tell-all book that I don't think the band was too happy about by all accounts. Scully's got some really, really funny stories that go back to that whole tour and go back to, their manager at the time and some of the deals that were happening behind the scenes. But if you haven't read that book, Living with the Dead, it's a lot of fun. If nothing else, this is an adventure of what it was like, running around on the road with those guys.
Sure. No, but look, at the end of the day, there aren't a lot of bands in the world, outside of, the Dead and Fish, maybe the Rolling Stones, maybe the Who, where people talk about, the Rolling Stones tour of 1981, or their Some Girls tour of 1978. And yeah, that, but to me, that's always just more of it being like this huge, what we now call a social media event, but back then it was just a huge event, and the Stones were in the United States, and there was always something going on around them or whatever. But, when we talk about tours with the Dead and with Fish, they actually mean something, and we've had conversations like this before, and we've talked about some of our favorite tours. But what makes Europe 72 so amazing for me is it may very well be the best known tour of any band that's ever played. Anyone who knows the Grateful Dead knows Europe 72, and people who don't know the Dead very well know Europe 72 just because of the exposure that it's had and the number of sales and the play that it gets on radio stations still to this day. And I love that the conversation about the band goes so deep that there's time to focus on an entire tour and the impact that tour had on the band. And we've talked about the transition that they were making from, their primal rock phase through American Beauty and Working Man's Dead. And one of the things that we keep trying to get to, and we'll get to one of these days, is Skull and Roses' 50th anniversary. And that was kind of the precursor to Europe 72 as a live album that was actually songs, not just, the long, dead, improvised jams. And I think Europe 72 took Skull and Roses and just expanded it, to a point where it was hard to deny that the Grateful Dead were now a true rock and roll band, with a strong working catalog of songs that were not necessarily geared towards, long mind-bending jams that required, psychedelic substances to really appreciate, although they didn't hurt.
Very good. Well, we're coming to the end of our time slot, so I want to talk a little bit about Playing in the Sand.
Yeah.
It's tickets went on sale. The pre-sale was today. I'm pretty sure I got my, I'm in the queue, as they said on my computer screen, January 13th through 16th, 2022. And it'll be right on the beach. There's a great video that's out there of the show from 2020. Yeah, the January 2020, right before the COVID shutdown, they squeezed it in. And John Mayer plays great, and you can see the hotel and the beach. So if you want to get psyched up for Playing in the Sand, check out the video from the 2020 Playing in the Sand.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, look, what's not to like? The Grateful Dead, sand, warm weather, the middle of winter. Sounds like a win.
Yeah, I was just there, not with obviously not with Dead and Company, but I was there on a family vacation just a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago now in January. And it's a very interesting part of Mexico. They were telling me 30 years ago there wasn't hardly even electricity there. And today the beach of Playa del Carmen is just lined with 500 room hotel after 500 room hotel where you walk out of your room and you walk right down to the Caribbean Sea.
Beautiful. Okay, well, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, and before we go, guys, we should probably talk about what we're going to have next week. And I'm super fired up about next week's guest. We've got Andy Bernstein from Headcount coming to join us. Huge Deadhead, obviously been working with the band for years. He actually has a cannabis voter initiative that he's put out over the last year. Headcount's entire mantra is, getting people signed up to vote, and they do it by going to shows and making sure there's tables at every venue and making sure that they get as many people that are unregistered voters to become registered voters. So it's had the support of the entire jam band community for years. I got to know Andy and his team back when I was coordinating the areas for a lot of the bigger festivals, and I was their point of contact on the ground to a lot of these festivals. And I always had just a tremendous amount of respect for what that organization did. So to have Andy on with us, Bob Weir's one of his board of directors, and other people in the band, as well as all sorts of other bands, like Humphreys McGee and Mo, and you name it, have all taken very proactive roles with Headcount. So it'd be terrific to have him on. And I think we're also going to talk a little bit next week about other sides of the Grateful Dead, and maybe discuss some of the side projects we've done. And one of the ones I think we were talking about doing was discussing what Garcia did with Reconstruction. And kind of the funkier side of the Garcia band when it was being done either through Reconstruction or Legion of Mary. But Reconstruction in '79 really exploring the funk side and the musicians that he played with. There were more session musicians out of San Francisco, and some of the shows they played, I think, in mid-April of 1979. So that's what's on tap for next week. We hope you guys will join us again next week for another great show. And great show today, guys, discussing Europe '72 and having Jerry Griffin on with us.
Great. I look forward to next week. I've seen the Headcount people set up many times at Red Rocks.
Yep, I think it's going to be, that will be a great show. Nobody can argue that it's a very timely and an important conversation to have, and I'm glad that he'll be able to give us a little bit of his time. Always exciting things to be talking about as far as the Dead are concerned. I do have a couple of Legion of Mary albums and love listening to Legion of Mary, and they've released some of that live stuff now too through Garcia's family provisions and stuff, and it's great music. That'll be a great conversation. Well, thank you guys. Thank you again to our guest, Jerry Griffin, for being with us today. We will look forward to talking to everybody next week. And until then, this is Larry Mishkin saying thank you, and be safe and enjoy your cannabis responsibly.